It's the Acting Income Podcast with Ben Hauck, episode 33. How podcasting is affecting my acting career.
It's the Acting Income Podcast with Ben Hauck. Turn your passion into income, Ben will show you how. With all the resources that you need to make it as an actor in an expensive city. To stay balanced and make money, you really can't go wrong with actingincome.com.
Welcome to the Acting Income Podcast. I'm Ben Hauck, your host of the podcast on acting and money and staying balanced. I'm very happy to have you listening. And if you're new to the podcast and haven't subscribed yet, pull up iTunes or your podcast app and click the subscribe button. You'll get episodes right as they come out. This is episode 33 titled, How Podcasting is Affecting My Acting Career. The show notes for this episode have all the important links referenced in today's show, which you can pull up right now at actingincome.com/episode 33. And now, here's a word from today's sponsor, my book, Longform Improv. If you've ever taken a class on improv, you know the lessons of improv are also applicable to life. If you get my book, Longform Improv, the complete guide to creating characters, sustaining scenes, and performing extraordinary heralds, you'll learn some of the radical ideas that improv taught me and how it dramatically changed my life. In the book, you'll learn about cooperative games versus competitive games, bargaining, and game structures like Chicken and Prisoner's Dilemma. What? You've never heard these topics discussed in improv classes? Well, definitely get my book. It's available for Kindle, Nook, and also from Barnes & Noble stores, Amazon.com, and the iTunes Store. Order your copy right now at actingincome.com/LFI and let me know what you think. Again, that's actingincome.com/LFI. This is the 33rd episode of the podcast, and I have an announcement. So far, since its launch in April 2015, the Acting Income Podcast has been a weekly podcast. Aside from a couple weeks when I just couldn't get out an episode, every Wednesday at 4 a.m. Eastern, I released an episode. I knew that'd be tough to do while also balancing the simultaneous pursuit of making money as an actor, but I really wanted to attempt the endeavor of making a weekly podcast and see what could happen. I set out with some goals. Those goals were basically these. I wanted the episodes to be concise. I didn't want you to have to wade through a long, formless interview to find practical nuggets of information. Instead, I wanted the episodes to be dense with actionable information. So, what I did was, I interviewed most of my guests using some pre-written questions to structure and focus the interview, to give it a logical arc. I actually didn't want the focus to be the guest, or what he or she had going on, but rather, the information. So, rather than titling each episode with simply the guest's name, as some acting podcasts do, I titled the episodes usually with some phrase like, how to, or what to do, or something of the sort. Again, practical, actionable, and you can see the podcast was that, right from its episode titles. I still put the guest's name in the title, but it was toward the end of the title. I'd originally aimed for something along the lines of 20-minute episodes. However, quickly I realized that some topics needed much more coverage, were interesting enough to go longer than 20 minutes, and basically, short 20-minute episodes were good for only some of the episodes. This meant that my interviews would usually go longer than 20 minutes, sometimes lasting up to 45 minutes. But I still wanted the interviews as concise as I could make them, and as dense with information as possible, as not to waste your time. So this meant for me, cutting and editing the interviews. This is where a bulk of my time was spent on episodes. I'd do a 20-minute interview and could edit it pretty quickly, maybe in 5 hours. Then I'd do a 45-minute interview and have 2 solid days of editing out the ums and dead air, the false starts and digressions. I'd also wrestle with the frustration of using all this time, because this was time I'd have to spend not working on my own acting career, not generating an income. It was a bind. Time spent on developing valuable content for you was time spent not on my acting career. Let me just say, I really like doing this. I love the Acting Income Podcast, and I'm proud of the episodes I've put out so far. I've had people on set tell me certain episodes have had real impacts on their careers as actors. What I've created is essentially a platform on which to share very specific, relevant acting topics. It's also a bully pulpit to voice some ideas and opinions around acting, and to do my part in persuading and educating actors on these topics where no other resources exist. It's helped me to find my voice and develop my voice, not to mention call upon skills I already have as an actor and work on skills I've yet to develop. The Acting Income podcast has made me more conscious of my microphone voice, made me more conscious of union contracts and union constitutions. It's given me the opportunity to educate other actors about the problems actors face, especially lesser-known problems lesser-known actors face in the relative darkness where we live, absent of celebrity. The thing is, the Acting Income podcast is a responsibility. It requires time to edit, but it also requires time to research. It requires time to explore and ponder and to consider the implications of this or that. Maybe it's not the podcast that's the responsibility, but I who's the responsibility. In other words, maybe it's not the podcast that is a responsibility, but that I'm holding myself responsible for it. I want to provide you with solid, practical information, and for the podcast to be a go-to. But I'm an actor. And this is the crux. I can't do it all. So I'm changing things up for the Acting Income podcast. I'm releasing myself from the obligation of putting out a weekly show. In so doing, I'm opening myself up to the possibilities of what might come in releasing that obligation. But more specifically, I'm transforming this podcast into more of a creative outlet. Whenever I want a topic related to acting or money or balance to be shared with you. By creative, I think I also mean that I want to explore different methods of presenting episodes, methods I can't pull off in following a demanding release schedule amid a demanding acting life. The Acting Income podcast may be weekly, for a bit of time or for streaks, but for now I'm thinking maybe it'll come out once a month. Maybe. Maybe not. If I have nothing I'm considering at the moment, maybe there won't be an episode that month. Or maybe if there is something I'm considering, I'll spend some more time researching the topic and creating an episode that presents the topic in a different way than I've done so far. Why am I making this change? Largely, it's the time factor. A weekly show has usually meant that I'm often taking time off from making acting income in order to produce the Acting Income podcast. Nailing down interviews is a challenge when my schedule is in flux and guests' schedules are in flux. Then there's the research beforehand of the topic so that I create appropriate questions. Then there's the editing, sometimes a mammoth endeavor that can be a bit demoralizing in that I'll see that I need 3 days to get the episode ready. 3 days I also need to be working as an actor, all with a Wednesday deadline fast approaching. And sure, there's quality of life issues at play too. This is November 2015, and the holidays are fast approaching. That means gift giving and tip giving. That also means travel. I'm also planning a move to a bigger, more expensive apartment, healthcare expenses, and an overseas trip. The money and time demands are burdensome, and I need a clearer head, not time editing a podcast. Right now, a weekly podcast seems irresponsible to uphold, especially if it's not a chief resource for income. I need to stay focused, and I also need to pare down. I'm lucky to enjoy a lot of things, but I'm cursed with ambition. So I need to contain my ambition and channel it into fewer things for what may come from that focused direction. Right now, I need to channel my ambition into my acting pursuits and my life and keep it from leaking out into other channels. All of this is to say, when I'm doing the Acting Income podcast, rather than serve my acting career, it seems to be a bit more of a conflict of interest with my acting career. Because when I'm weekly thinking about it and spending so much time with the responsibility of it, I'm not acting. I'm not thinking of ways to bust out in my acting or generating greater acting income. Surely the podcast serves my acting career in some ways, so I'm not giving up on it completely. It's been a sacrifice in giving it to you. But after nearly 8 months of weekly sacrifices, it's become a burden. The fear is not knowing what will happen to the audience or the legacy of the podcast in sharing this with you. Will you stay subscribed? Will you look out for future episodes? Will you still care? I suppose that fear doesn't matter because there is what the podcast has been, and what's in the future is what the podcast will be. But if you'd like to stay on, I'd be honored to have you remain as an audience. You can stay subscribed to the podcast on iTunes or your podcast app, And once an episode is ready, you'll get it. If you don't listen to podcasts very much, then you can also follow the podcast on Twitter at Acting Income, and I'll tweet out when there are new episodes. If you don't follow Twitter, there's always the Acting Income podcast on Facebook. And lastly, you can join the mailing list. Just add your name and email address at actingincome.com/join, and I'll email you as new episodes are released. Again, that's actingincome.com/join. You know, some people will tell you should dump all of your energy and resources into your acting career. Then other people will tell you you should be human and do things that aren't at all related to acting. I hate that dilemma. I want to put people who advocate either side into a pit and have them duke it out. There is no right answer for that dilemma. But right now, for me, I'm in the former camp of putting more of my time into my acting career. I could live anywhere I want, but I chose New York City. Why not act? This episode was sponsored by Longform Improv, the complete guide to creating characters, sustaining scenes, and performing extraordinary heralds by Ben Hauck. To get a copy of Longform Improv, also available for Kindle and Nook, visit actingincome.com/LFI. The show notes for this episode are available at actingincome.com/episode 33, where you can also leave a comment on this episode. You can also find Acting Income on Twitter and Facebook. If you'd like to join the mailing list, visit actingincome.com/join. If you have a story idea, visit actingincome.com/pitch. And if you love the content of this podcast, announce your love with a review of this podcast on iTunes at actingincome.com/iTunes. I'm Ben Hauck. Bye for now. And for more information, as always, check out actingincome.com.